Hi everyone, I hope you are all well in these strange times, but they are getting better. So by now you would have all seen the new Evora. Must say it does look very nice. I did watch the reveal with a feeling of sadness that I won't have any involved with it after I was made redundant by Lotus, which is almost a year ago. Oh well, that's life, and I wish Lotus great success with it. I really do, for all the people at Hethel. So that's the future. Now we'll go back to the past with the Evora and also the present. Okay, so in part 5 we're moving on to the front section of the car and what's contained within that section. We'll start at the windscreen and work forward from that. It's a standard laminated windscreen manufactured in Peru. No sensors or anything like that, and if you replace one you will need to stick the mirror plinth back on, as it does not come supplied with it. I do know of a few cars where during fitting at the factory the seal line has not been 100% around the screen, usually in the top corner. If you have water ingress into the footwell, pull off the inner A-pillar cover and check for evidence of water running down the A-pillar. If there is, then you will need to remove the outer A-pillar cover and check the seal. It's sometimes difficult to find the actual gap in the bond line. You can try to seal any gaps, but the only 100% way is to remove the windscreen and reseal it properly. If you happen to crack or break the windscreen when you're cutting it out, it'll cost you about £760 for a new one, plus your rubber seals and labour of course. Now, mentioning the outer A-pillar covers, some of you may have experienced another common problem. These covers often get the top corner breaking off and can be broken off when you clean the car and catch it with a cloth. These are about £46 each to replace, and they're made of plastic. This problem was more common in very hot climate markets like the Middle East, where they would just break off or crack due to the heat. Lotus introduced an exclusive version of the covers specifically for this market, made from carbon fibre, and these will cost you, from Lotus, £645 each. Now, hidden underneath the windscreen frame is the wiper motor, which is supplied as an assembly and bolted to the windscreen frame underneath. It's not the quietest setup, I would have to say, and hope that the Evora, which has twin wiper blades, is much quieter. There are two types of motor depending on the VIN of your car, so order the right one. Now, to replace the wiper motor, you need to remove the front clam, which is a requirement to access many of the components buried in the subframe. Labour time for wiper motor replacement is 2.5 hours, and this includes clamshell, remove and refit. Okay, we'll drop down to what's under the skin at the front now. The heart of the front end is the subframe, which everything is fixed to. The Elise and Exige have a separate composite crash structure, and the suspension mountings are integral with the tub. The Evora front subframe is made from aluminium panels and extrusions and bonded together using the same process as the main tub, and it comes in at about 25 kilos or 55 pounds. This combines to form a crash structure and mountings for all the front suspension independent of the tub itself. So if a suspension mount is damaged, you're not replacing the tub as you would on an Elise or an Exige. It is fixed to the front of the tub with 12 fixings, and the only replaceable part is the front bumper beam. Any other serious damage means a new subframe. Now, for my friends in the USA who have taken the front bumper off a 400 series car, may have noticed these strange black things bolted to the front of the subframe and thought, what the hell are these? Well, I must say, I thought exactly the same thing when I first saw them. So of course, I asked the question. Apparently, the only purpose they serve was to get the car through the federal crash test. They found on the angled impact test the car would slide along the crash block, and that failed the test. So these were fitted to dig into the wooden covering on the crash block, thus making the crash structure deform and do its job. Now, of course, as these were used for the crash test, they must be fitted to the car to comply with regulations. But honestly, they serve no purpose on the car at all. Now, Lotus give these a nice technical name in the parts list, being called lateral displacement bracket assemblies. Nice. A new subframe will set you back about £3,000 and a labour time quoted by Lotus to replace just over 17 hours. But that's better than replacing a complete tub just because a suspension mount has been torn out. So what's bolted to the subframe? We'll start with the steering rack, which on the Evora is a hydraulically assisted Honda unit made by TRW. Lotus mount it differently to the Honda, and if you look at the rack it will indicate what hand drive it is suited to, i.e. left hand drive, right hand drive, cast into the body of the rack. Ignore that, as it would be opposite on the Evora. So a left hand drive rack will suit a right hand drive car and vice versa. Lotus do put a sticker on it to identify this. So why did Lotus stick with the hydraulic rack and not go for the electrically assisted rack, which would have been an easier installation with less parts? Simple really, feel. Driving a Lotus is all about feedback and feel through the steering, and an electrically assisted rack just couldn't provide this feeling at the time. Okay, so that's the steering rack. Now we'll have a look at the suspension and the brakes. As far as dampers and springs go, the options are as already shown in the video on the rear end. That goes for the brakes as well. The wishbones are the same construction, being made of cast alloy and in Italy. There have only been a couple of changes in the Evora's life, one being the stiffer inner bushes as mentioned on the rear section video. And from the introduction of the Evora S, the top wishbone upper ball joint position was altered to increase the caster angle of the suspension. The lower wishbone has stiffer inner bushes as already mentioned. The hub carrier is the same on all models, as is the anti-roll bar. Brakes are, as the rear, AP racing, but obviously larger diameter pistons. Suspension geometry is adjusted using the eccentric bolts for both camber and caster, but this time on both inboard pivots. Now, a little service note here. Where the track wheel ends are fitted to the steering arm, they sit in a cup and have a drain hole in this cup. Now obviously as the car used, these become bunged up. So that fills with water and this will cause corrosion, and if you need to remove the track wheel end, invariably it will be seized and it will snap off. So keep an eye on this drain hole or pack the cup with grease to stop any corrosion. Right, just below the wiper motor is the HVAC unit. This consists of two main units, one being the air distribution unit, which lives under the dash inside the car. The HVAC module is located within the front subframe area, just forward of the tub. Now the ADU has two flaps with individual stepper motors controlling them to distribute air to the windscreen, face level vents and also the footwell. The HVAC module has multiple components to supply hot, ambient, cold or air-conditioned air to the car. It consists of a twin motor fan controlled by a variable resistor, a heater matrix, an AC evaporator, TVX valve and various flaps, and an actuator to activate these flaps. The only replaceable components are the TVX valve, the actuator, and on the 400 series cars the fan speed control resistor module, nicknamed the Hedgehog. Now to replace the Hedgehog on a right hand drive car you need to remove the front clamshell, but if your car is left hand drive it can be replaced from underneath the car without removing the clamshell. This is reflected in the labour time for this operation, where the labour time to replace the Hedgehog on the left hand drive car is 1.7 hours and on the right hand drive car it's 7 hours. I mention this because early 400s and also hot market 400s experienced problems with this component, displaying faults such as no operation of the blower fans permanently on, etc. The fans Heater matrix and evaporator are not supplied by Lotus separately, and if any of these fail or spring a leak, you will need to buy a complete HVAC assembly. It will cost you around £670 plus fitting. A problem is noted on early Evoras with the HVAC becoming blocked, so the casing filled with water. A service bulletin was issued to resolve this by just pulling out the one-way valves in the drain tubes. Nice easy one that. Now the Evora is the only Lotus ever made with a pollen filter of any kind. Excuse me. This is of course replaceable and should be changed every 2 years in normal conditions. And for a change, it's dead easy to change. Just pop open the front access cover and you will see a black plastic cover secured with a plastic screw. Remove this cover, reach in and just pull the filter out. The new filter just pushes back in, refit the cover, whack the screw in, and that's it, job done. Now, since the start of production of the Evora, 2 types of AC gas has been used. R134A on early cars and early 400 series and certain markets, and on later cars this was replaced by R1234YF gas. This is identified by the colour of the caps on the AC charge ports, which are located in the right hand front wheel arch area. Blue is R134A and black caps are R1234YF. Okay, so moving forward from the HVAC unit, we come to the cooling package. This comprises of the power steering cooling pipe, the AC condenser, which on early Evoras corroded from the inside, then leaked. Charge cooler radiator on supercharged cars only. Main coolant radiator, which is a generic radiator made by a company that supply mainstream manufacturers like BMW and Audi. Incidentally, coolant mixture is 50-50 and this includes the charge cooler circuit as well. And finally on the package, 2 cooling fans to keep it all at the right temperature. There is an electronic fan control module unit fitted to the subframe panel on the 400 series cars. Now on the introduction of the 400, these gave problems and would overheat and cause the fans to either not work or run all the time, and they get quite hot. To protect the wiring from any overheating, an inline fuse is fitted in the right hand front wheel arch area shown here. Sorry, left hand front. It contains an 80 amp fuse, so if your cooling fan stops working and you have the controller replaced, be sure to check this fuse as well. The fans will operate at about 88 degrees and go to full speed at 98 degrees. Now with the introduction of the 400 series, additional cooling was required because more power means more heat. So an additional radiator is mounted on the right hand side forward of the wheel arch and is just plumbed in line with the main radiator. Unlike the Exceed V6, the Evora does not have an additional fan attached to this and just relies on the movement of the car to force the air through. So that's all the water cooling. Now we'll have a look at the oil cooling that lives at the front end as well. The first normally aspirated Evora had no oil coolers at all, just a heat exchanger on the engine courtesy of Toyota. This part would later be used for the gearbox oil cooler system that was fitted to Evoras and Exceeds. With the introduction of the Evora S, it was decided this wasn't up to the job. So 2 oil coolers were mounted at the front with a sandwich plate fitted to the oil pipes coming from the engine. A recall was issued to replace one of these pipes that was found to rub on the subframe, so it could wear through and leak oil. With the introduction of the IPS, coolers were needed for the automatic transmission. So a version of the engine cooler setup was adopted using a similar adapted Elise sandwich thermostat plate. With the introduction of the Evora IPS, Lotus had a problem. It would be ridiculous to have all 4 oil cooler radiators up the front and also a bit crowded. So the cooling arrangements were rationalised to have a larger single oil cooler for each application, one for the engine and one for the transmission. With the introduction of the 400 series cars, it was all changed, and the engine lost its air to fluid cooler up the front and adopted a liquid to liquid system at the rear. This used the engine coolant to absorb heat from the engine oil. The heat exchanger is mounted on the front part of the rear subframe and is, I can tell you, a right bugger to get to if you need to change it. The transmission kept an air to liquid setup but loses the Elise sandwich plate in favour of the smaller Exceed transmission thermostat. So finally, for this look at the front section, we're going to have a look at the headlamps, manufactured especially for Lotus by a company called Perry. They're called Lightwire now and not Perry. A large unit that forms part of the shape of the car and contains LED and xenon light sources. It is assembled in 3 sections, with the lower section containing the xenon lamp, main and dip unit, the xenon ballast unit and an 8 amber LED turn lamp assembly. The centre section, which contains the inner cosmetic bezel, direction indicator outer lens and a 10 LED side lamp assembly. The top section is a polycarbonate lens with a UV hard coat. The only serviceable items are the D1S burner unit, voltage ballast unit and the high tension cable. None of the LEDs are accessible or replaceable. It is a legal requirement for bi-xenon headlamps in European vehicles to have a wash system, so the Evora has a twin jet nozzle hydraulic pump system. The pump is replaceable, as is the cover. A problem some cars suffer from is the lens coating peeling off, but these can be repaired luckily. If this is beyond repair or an LED fails, the complete unit will require replacing, and upwards of £1,300 each. It's not inexpensive. Incidentally, early cars had the word Lotus and some had gloss black bezels. These were discontinued and replaced by ones with no Lotus word and a grained black bezel. So if you've got a car with the early ones and need a replacement, you won't get the original, and you'll have to buy a pair of new ones if you want them to match. Yeah, cheers Lotus, on behalf of all Evora owners. So that's the front end looked at, and the final part of the sectional look at the Evora. In the next episode, I will be looking at the bodywork of the Evora and its construction, material, removal and repair. So please keep subscribing. I'm nearly up to 1,000 now, and of course keep liking and commenting. I love some of your comments. I'd like to say I've had some interesting emails from my patrons on my Patreon page about their Lotus experience, the way Lotus are going and the new Evora. I've also been able to help some with some technical problems they had with their cars. You can join in on this by going to my Patreon page, pledging and signing up. So for now, stay safe, enjoy life and so long.